Signature wasn't mine. I stood in that conference room and I didn't say a word. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just looked at my uncle across the long oak table and I thought, you actually did it. Let me back up. My father died on a Tuesday, 6:47 in the morning. I know the exact time because I was the one holding his hand when the monitor went flat. And I remember looking at the clock on the wall because I didn't know what else to do with my eyes. The nurses came in quietly. Someone put a hand on my shoulder, and then it was over. 23 years of being his daughter, and just like that, I was standing in a hospital hallway at 6:52 a.m., wondering if I was supposed to call someone. I called my uncle. That was my first mistake. My father and his brother had always been close, or at least I thought they were. Growing up, my uncle was at every birthday, every holiday, every graduation. He gave the toast at my parents' anniversary dinner. He cried at my mother's funeral 6 years ago. Real tears. The kind that made your face go red and ugly. I believed those tears. I believed all of it. Dad had been sick for about 8 months. Pancreatic cancer, which moves fast and waits for no one. When the doctors gave us the timeline, he sat me down at the kitchen table, the same table we'd eaten 10,000 dinners at, and he told me he had already taken care of everything. The house, his accounts, his business. He'd updated the will. He'd set up a trust. You don't have to worry, he said. Everything goes to you. Your uncle knows. He's the executor. I nodded. I said, okay. I was trying not to cry. I should have asked more questions. The weeks after the funeral were a blur of casseroles and sympathy cards and paperwork I didn't fully understand. My uncle was there for all of it. At the house, helping me sort through Dad's things, sitting at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad, making lists. He kept saying things like, I'll handle it and you just focus on grieving and your father trusted me with this. And because I was exhausted and heartbroken and 29 years old and I had no idea how estate law worked, I let him. The first thing I noticed was the car. My father drove a 10-year-old truck. Practical man, always had been. But about 3 weeks after the funeral, my uncle showed up at the house in a brand new Land Rover. Silver, still had the dealer sticker residue on the back windshield. I asked him about it and he said a client had given him a deal. I let that go. The second thing was the house. Dad's house was the house I grew up in. A 4-bedroom Craftsman on a quiet street, paid off entirely, worth somewhere around $580,000 in the current market. It was supposed to come to me through the trust. My uncle was supposed to manage the transition, get me the paperwork, get it transferred into my name. 2 months passed. I asked about the transfer. He said it was in process. 3 months, still in process. 4 months, he stopped returning my calls as fast. I want to be clear about something. I'm not a suspicious person by nature. I take people at their word. I am the kind of person who assumes the best and then feels genuinely surprised when the worst happens. It's not naivety exactly. It's more like a stubborn faith in people that I've been slowly, painfully cured of. What finally broke through was a phone call from a woman named Patrice. Patrice was my father's accountant, not a close family friend, just the woman who'd done his business taxes for 15 years. She called me on a Thursday afternoon, and I could tell from the first 3 words that she was uncomfortable. I just want to make sure, she said carefully, that you're aware the business accounts were closed. I was not aware. She told me gently that someone had liquidated the 2 business accounts associated with my father's small landscaping company. Together, they held just over $140,000, and that the transactions had gone through about 6 weeks after Dad passed. She had seen the paperwork. The signature on the authorization forms was my father's name. My father had been dead for 6 weeks when those forms were signed. I thanked Patrice. I hung up. I sat very still in my car in the parking lot of a grocery store for about 4 minutes. Then I called my cousin, my uncle's daughter, and I told her nothing. I just asked casually if her dad had said anything about selling property lately. There was a pause. She said he'd mentioned something about a real estate opportunity. She sounded uncertain. I said that was interesting and changed the subject. That night, I called an estate attorney. Her name was Ms. Okafor. I'd found her through a friend, someone who said she was sharp and didn't waste time. I drove to her office the next morning with every document I had, which wasn't much. A copy of the death certificate, the original will my dad had shown me 2 years ago, and the notes I'd written down from my conversation with Patrice. Ms. Okafor read everything. She asked questions. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Do you have a copy of the trust?" I didn't. My uncle had the original. I'd assumed I'd get a copy eventually. She said, "We need to get that." It took 2 weeks and a formal legal request to get the trust documents. What came back was not what my father had described to me at the kitchen table. The trust had been amended. There was a codicil, dated 4 months before my father died, that named my uncle as the primary beneficiary of the real estate assets. The signature at the bottom was my father's, except my father, by that point, had been on high-dose pain medication and had shown significant cognitive decline. I have the medical records to prove it. His oncologist had documented it explicitly. My dad had not been legally competent to sign binding documents in the last 4 months of his life. Someone had gotten him to sign anyway. Ms. O'Coffer said, "This is fraud." She said it the way you'd say the weather is cold. Matter of fact, no drama. I appreciated that. Here's what I learned in the weeks that followed as Miss Abet Okafor and a forensic document examiner started pulling everything apart. My uncle had visited my father 3 times in the last month of his life. Visits I hadn't known about because I was working and my dad had a part-time home health aide who didn't think to tell me. During at least one of those visits, documents were signed. The aide later told investigators she had stepped out of the room. She hadn't thought anything of it. The business account liquidation was authorized with a power of attorney that my uncle claimed my father had granted him. But the date on that document was suspicious. Ms. Okafor flagged it immediately, and the forensic examiner later confirmed that the paper and ink were inconsistent with the date listed. The document had likely been backdated. And then there was the house. My uncle had listed it. I found out the way anyone finds out anything in the 21st century. I was searching my childhood address online, just to check, just because something felt wrong. And there it was on a real estate site, 4-bed craftsman, motivated seller, open house Saturday, listed for $565,000. The listing had gone up 11 days ago. The closing was scheduled for 3 weeks from that Thursday. I sat with that information for about an hour. I wanted to call him. I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to drive to his house and stand on his lawn and ask him how he could do this, how he could sit at that kitchen table with his yellow legal pad and look me in the eye while he was stealing everything my father left me. I didn't do any of that. I called Ms. O'Coffer instead. She told me what we were going to do. We were going to let the closing happen. Or rather, we were going to let my uncle think it was going to happen. We had 3 weeks, and we were going to use every day of them. What followed was the most methodical 3 weeks of my life. Ms. Okafor filed an emergency motion to contest the trust amendment on the grounds of undue influence and lack of testamentary capacity. She also contacted the district attorney's office with the forensic examiner's findings about the business account documents. The DA's office opened a fraud investigation. I gathered everything I could find. Texts from my uncle during my father's illness. There were messages where he referenced handling the assets and making sure everything is protected, which in context took on a very different meaning. I found emails between my uncle and the real estate agent going back 2 months, starting just weeks after the funeral. I found a wire transfer record through the estate bank account, which my uncle had access to as executor, of $22,000 sent to an account I didn't recognize, labeled consulting fees. My father did not hire any consultants in the last months of his life. My uncle, it turned out, had a gambling problem. I didn't know this. My cousin didn't know this either, or if she did, she never said. But Ms. O'Coffer's investigator found it. Casino records, credit card debt, a second mortgage on my uncle's house that he'd taken out 18 months ago. He was in serious trouble before my father died. And when my father died, he saw a solution. The day before the closing, Ms. O'Coffer called me. "Are you sure you want to be there?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "I want to be there." The closing was at 10 a.m. at a title company downtown. My uncle didn't know I was coming. As far as he knew, everything was proceeding normally. He hadn't been served yet, the fraud investigation was still in its early stages, and Ms. Okafor had deliberately kept our legal filings as quiet as procedurally possible. I arrived at 9:45 and waited in the lobby. My uncle walked in at 9:58 with the buyer's agent. He was wearing a suit I didn't recognize. He looked good, relaxed, the way someone looks when they think they've gotten away with something. He didn't see me until he turned from the reception desk. I watched his face. There is no word in English that quite covers what happened to his expression in that moment. It wasn't just shock. It wasn't just guilt. It was the specific look of a person who has built a very careful structure and suddenly realizes all at once that the foundation was never solid. I said, "Hi." He said nothing. Ms. Okafor came in behind me 30 seconds later with a representative from the DA's office and 2 detectives. The closing did not happen. What happened instead was that my uncle was served with a civil suit contesting the trust amendment. The detectives informed him that he was under investigation for fraud, specifically the falsification of the power of attorney and the unauthorized liquidation of the business accounts. The title company halted the transaction immediately, pending legal review. My uncle asked if he could make a phone call. I left before he finished dialing. I didn't need to see the rest. I had already seen what I needed to see. The case took almost a year to resolve. The trust amendment was invalidated. The court agreed that my father had lacked the cognitive capacity to execute binding documents in the period when it was signed, and that the circumstances strongly suggested undue influence. The house came back to me. The business account funds, what was left of them, were ordered returned, though recovering money someone has spent is a different matter than winning the legal right to it, and we settled for a partial amount that I won't disclose here. My uncle pled guilty to 2 counts of elder financial abuse and 1 count of document fraud. He received a sentence that included significant prison time, a substantial fine, and permanent restitution obligations. He called me once from the county jail before sentencing. I let it go to voicemail. I listened to it once, late at night, sitting in the kitchen of my dad's house, my house, with a cup of tea going cold on the table. He said he was sorry. He said he hadn't meant for it to go this far. He said he hoped someday I could understand. I deleted the message. Here is what I want you to understand about the year I spent fighting this. I was exhausted for most of it. Grief and legal strategy are not easy companions. You're supposed to be mourning, and instead, you're reading depositions and forwarding emails to an attorney and trying to remember the exact dates of phone calls you made 8 months ago. There were nights I sat in my father's house surrounded by boxes I still hadn't finished unpacking, and I thought about how much simpler it would have been to just let it go. Sell the house, take whatever I was offered, walk away. I didn't walk away because of something my father said to me once, years ago, when I was upset about an injustice I can't even remember now. He said, "The people who count on you getting tired are the ones you cannot afford to tire for." I typed that sentence into my phone the night I found the real estate listing. I looked at it every time I wanted to stop. My father was a practical man. He trusted the wrong person. We all do, sometimes. But he also left me a document examiner's phone number scrawled in the back of his address book, which I only found when I was going through his desk. Next to it, he'd written, "Just in case." I don't know what he knew or suspected. Maybe nothing. Maybe he was just careful. Either way, it felt like one last gift. The house needs a new roof. There's a tree in the backyard that's been slowly dying for 2 years, and I haven't had the heart to take it down yet. The kitchen still has the same linoleum floor my parents put in 20 years ago, and I keep meaning to replace it and keep not doing it because it still feels like his kitchen. I'm still working on that part, but the house is mine. The accounts are settled. The will my father meant to leave me is, after a year and a significant legal bill, the will that stands. I learned more than I wanted to know about estate law, forensic document examination, the legal definition of testamentary capacity, and the specific kind of damage that quiet greed does to a family over time. I learned that grief makes people vulnerable in ways that other people, the wrong people, will absolutely exploit. I learned to read documents before I sign them, and to ask questions before I trust, and to keep records of everything, always, even when nothing seems wrong yet. Especially then. If you're watching this, and you are in the middle of settling an estate and something feels off, the paperwork is slow. The executor is vague. Money seems to be moving that you didn't authorize. Please listen to that feeling. Get an attorney. Get a second opinion. Get the documents yourself. Don't wait for someone to bring them to you. My father thought everything was handled. He trusted his brother with the most important thing he had. I am glad I didn't stop at trusting. I am glad I showed up to that closing. I've thought a lot about what made my uncle think he would get away with it. I don't think he was stupid. That's the part that still stays with me. He was careful, actually. The backdated power of attorney, the visits timed around my work schedule, the slow erosion of paperwork that was designed to make me feel like everything was being handled. That takes planning. That takes patience. What it didn't take, apparently, was any real reckoning with what happens when the person you're stealing from decides not to be tired. That's the thing about greed. And I mean the particular kind of greed that targets grief, that looks at someone in the worst moment of their life and sees an opportunity. It depends entirely on exhaustion. It counts on you being too devastated to read the documents, too overwhelmed to ask questions, too grateful for the help to notice what's being taken. My uncle knew I was grieving. He was there at the hospital. He saw my face when that monitor went flat, and he calculated correctly that I would be vulnerable. And then he calculated incorrectly that vulnerable meant permanently undefended. He was wrong about that second part, and that's where the whole thing fell apart for him. I'm not going to pretend I was some kind of chess player from the beginning. I wasn't. I was just a woman who got a phone call from her father's accountant and felt something cold settle in her stomach. And instead of explaining it away, she listened to it. That's all intelligence really is, in a moment like that. Not brilliance, not legal knowledge, not strategy. Just the willingness to follow an uncomfortable feeling somewhere it might lead. The rest was work. Slow, expensive, exhausting work. There is nothing cinematic about spending a Tuesday night cross-referencing bank transaction dates against hospital admission records. There is nothing satisfying in the moment about forwarding your 14th email to an attorney and waiting. Grief doesn't pause for litigation. You're doing both at once, and some nights you are doing neither well. But here's what I know now. On the other side of it, the people who wrong you are always gambling on a specific version of you, the version that gives up, the version that decides it isn't worth it. My uncle wasn't just stealing a house. He was betting that I would decide the fight cost more than the prize. And the only way to lose that bet is to keep going anyway. One document, one phone call, one court date at a time, until the structure they built on your exhaustion has nowhere left to stand. My father kept a document examiner's number in the back of his address book. He wrote just in case next to it. I don't know if he suspected something, or if he was just the kind of man who kept a just in case for everything. Either way, it was the most useful thing he ever gave me. Not because of what it unlocked legally, but because it reminded me at the moment I needed it most that he had thought ahead. That he had tried to take care of me even from a distance he couldn't have imagined. That's what I carry forward. Not the fraud case, not the verdict, not the look on my uncle's face in that conference room, though I won't pretend I don't still think about that sometimes. What I carry is this. The people who love you leave you tools. Your job is to use them. And the people who count on your grief to protect them from consequences have already made their worst mistake. They've underestimated what love teaches you to protect.